Great bodywork, exquisite lines and design features, and a joy to be in control of. Yep, it's the Lotus Elise, a fantastic car, but sadly it led to the death of this, the Lotus 110 Superbike. The bike which Chris Boardman used, of course, to win the prologue time trial back in 1994 at the Tour de France. We need to take a trip down memory lane for today. Now, the engineer who started the ball rolling concerning the style of this frame was a gent called Mike Burrows way back in the 1980s. And the UCI's bike regulations were a bit like they are today, kind of outdated in my mind for the sport to develop with the rest of the technology in the world. But in 1990, the UCI made some changes to their rulebook and suddenly radical frame shapes and styles were allowed. Sadly though, those archaic pre-revised regulations frustrated Burrows and he largely shelved the project until 1991 when a Lotus engineer, Rudy Truman, caught a glimpse of the bike design and convinced his boss at Lotus to let him and a few others develop the track version of this bike, the Lotus 108. Chris Boardman, of course, he famously used that to gold medal success at the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. The track though is a limited market and the road version, the 110, just like this very one, started to be developed. However, a twist in the story happened because back in August of 1993, supercar company Bugatti bought the Lotus brand because it wasn't in the most stable of positions financially. And with that buyout came the new desire to have a new car project too, because back then it was only the Lotus Esprit that was being produced still. A cool car though, remember that was the one that went underwater in James Bond. Unsurprisingly, a new car project does take a lot of time, money and resources, and well, the results, pretty fantastic, let's face it. The Lotus 111, also known as the Elise to most of us out there, but during this time, the actual Lotus 110 Superbike team was becoming smaller and smaller. And pair this up also with the fact that the lead engineer behind it, Rudy Truman, he departed the company and went to work for Mavic. And also another change of rules by the UCI in 1996 meant that by the end of 96, the Lotus 110 Superbike project was done and dusted. Right, we've also got to take our minds back again to 1994 when Chris Boardman was riding for the GAN team and the team were actually contracted to ride bikes from Le Monde. Le Monde, of course, was the brand of Greg LeMond, the team leader, so he had a fairly big say in what could and couldn't be used. However, the fact that Rudy Truman, who remember worked at Lotus, was now working at Mavic, who were a big sponsor of the team, probably had something to say in the part which allowed Boardman to use this bike in competition. Boardman piloted this bike to victory in the Tour de Suisse time trial, then the opening prologue in Lille at the Tour de France. However, another twist in the story happened there because Boardman wanted to get super low. He had this amazing ability to get really aerodynamic, yet the actual bike itself wouldn't allow him to do so. So Rudy Truman, again, he was relied upon to make a special set of handlebars for Boardman to use. But problems came with that too. And the images on screen will show you right now, the handlebars that were used were actually different and the brake levers were scarily short and, well, dangerous. And Roger Leger, the GAN team manager at the time, was absolutely furious in that he thought that Rudy and the rest, they were going to ruin Chris's chance of winning the prologue. But there's a famous quote of Boardman saying, "I'm not going to touch the brakes. If I touch the brakes, I'll lose." Just to let you know, there was 4 90-degree corners in that prologue. And well, the year it culminated with Boardman winning the World Championships in Sicily for the time trial. This one is an almost perfect replica of the one that Chris Boardman used back in the early 90s. Now this one belongs to Simon Freebrey, who's kindly brought it along today. And well, right now I'm at Bicester Heritage, which is really cool. It's got loads of old motor cars here, as well as Golden Age cycles, which belongs to a gentleman called Brian. And quite recently, I actually bought a bike from Brian, and that was the one that Oliver Bridgewood suffered to his heart's content up the Croce d'Arne in Italy on that single speed bike. Enough about that, let's take a look at the Lotus 110. What then is the big differences between the 110 and the track version, the 108? Well, firstly, you've got normal road style dropouts on the rear end here, although on this one you can actually switch them around and put some track ends in there. But importantly, the actual frame design was different. This one, you've got 2 chainstays and 2 front fork legs, whereas on the track bike, you only had one of those, which was super futuristic back in the day, back in 1992, for instance. Then if you were going to pop along to your local Lotus 110 dealer and order one, well, you were never even offered a size variant because it only came in one size. So essentially, to get it to fit you in terms of your saddle height, you would chop the frame down and then use this seat clamp which slotted over the top and then bolted into place. And then the reach of it, well, they highly recommended using a Look ergo stem like what's fitted on this bike here right now, because you can adjust that infinitely into different positions. Now these bikes are all about aerodynamics. That's the reason behind the wacky style frame design. And with aerodynamics often comes integration, and integrated cables in this case. Just check them out where they go in to the, well, I can't really say top tube, but the upper part of the frame here. Now, speaking to Simon earlier on, I asked him how long it took to actually build and assemble this bike. And of course, it spent him years and years to build it up to this exact replica. But getting these cables in place was not an easy task. In fact, it took him hours to do so. In the end, he ended up tying some cotton thread onto the end of the cable, putting it inside of the frame, and using a vacuum cleaner to suck it through to the other end. And he's done a great job of it. Sticking though with integration, check out this headset. So it's kind of the upper cup is here within the top of the head tube, and then you've got the actual locking nut here on the top. Now, if you had certain models of headsets, they would not work with this bike, I don't reckon. That's why this Mavic one is almost perfect for the job, because you've got a little grub screw which tightens it in place, and then you've got another nut which further tightens it in place. Remember, of course, Mavic were a really important part of the actual jigsaw when it came to the Lotus development. But what is so good about it then is the level of adjustability. So you've got two bolts here on the side of the stem. The first one here is labelled B. You can actually adjust this part, so this part here up and down, and then on the A part you can adjust that around as well. So you've got so many different positions you can get into. Then fitted into this Look ergo stem, we've got a Mavic base bar and also some time trial extension bars here too. Now, I've got my own little story about one of these Mavic base bars. Back in about 1996, I went into a local bike shop and I asked if I could get one. They said, yeah, we'll get one for you, be a week or two. They've never called me back, so if you are watching this, please do get in touch because I still would like one. But then fitted onto the base bar, on the right hand side here, yeah, that's right, we've got a Mavic Zap gear lever control. We've also got one on the extension of the handlebar here. This is electronic gearing. Way back in 1994 it existed. But interestingly, we've also got a traditional bar end style shifter here on the end of this time trial handlebar. The reason being there wasn't one actually developed or available for the front derailleur, so it's a standard Bowden style cable that operated that front derailleur. And fitted onto the time trial base bar, we've got a pair of Mavic brake levers. Now, I've not seen a pair of these since about 1995, and these ones are immaculate. There's no crackage or shrinkage or anything like that on the actual hood there. And I think that has really stood the test of time ever so well. And finally, fitted into the end of the end plugs is a pair of Lotus Sport custom-made bar end plugs, and they're by Caps Guru, that's a guy who's based in Somerset in the UK, and he would have made these especially for the owner. Now, it's worth pointing out actually the way that the time trial extension bars are fitted onto the base bar. They're actually using some old, well, they weren't actually old at the time, but they're using some brake lever clamps. So if you take back your hoods on your brake levers, you'll see an exact same bit of machinery which attach those to the bars. I love that. I've never noticed that on these Mavic bars before. Now, stopping power, that again is provided by Mavic in the form of these brake calipers. Now, for many of you out there, you may not realise that Mavic were actually a group set manufacturer. And well, if you had Mavic group set on your bike, generally it meant you had quite a bit of money because they weren't the cheapest of things, but they looked absolutely fantastic. Just check out this brake barrel adjuster here on the front. It was actually built in within the actual machined part of the caliper there, as opposed to being on the top like most of the systems we see are. What about the wheels then? Let's start with the front one, the Mavic 3G. I reckon this is probably one of the best wheel designs there's ever been. The reason being, super versatile, right? So you can actually swap out the hubs on them. So you could use it on the rear, you could use it on the front like it is here, but also use it on the track. And there's even somewhere in existence, I've tried to find one for my own, a cassette version too. So you simply use an old bottom bracket lock ring spanner, remove the internals, put the new one in, and Bob's your uncle. You can use it on whatever discipline you like. But why exactly was this wheel so successful? Well, it was super aerodynamic, just 3 big blades of carbon there, direction specific. So if you put it in the other way around, you are going to lose a fraction of a watt, I imagine, because you have a thicker leading front edge than the rear, which is slightly thinner. So you're going to cut through that wind just that little bit easier. Now the Mavic Comet rear wheel, just like the 3G front wheel, has an adjustable or adaptable hub system. So again, you could use it on the front if you wanted to in a time trial. Believe it or not, that's still actually permitted under some regulations out there. So on the road, you do occasionally see someone with disc wheels front and rear. Very, very rare though, but on the track, pretty commonplace. Now this wheel has actually got fitted a 12/21 8-speed screw-on block on there. Some of you will remember that out there, so they screwed on as opposed to a cassette which slides on. 12/21, you're not going to get up any hills on that very easily, are you? Especially when you're paired up with a 42 tooth inner chainring. Right, let's talk then about this rear mech on here. Funky, futuristic, call it what you like. This cutting edge back in 1993, 1994 roughly. How does that rear derailleur work then? To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that there is a battery tucked away in the end of the actual tri-bar extension there. It's like a 6-volt camera style battery. Maybe that sends a signal to the shift buttons, which then sends the signal to the rear derailleur. But there's one thing for certain, you can't change gear unless you're actually pedalling. So it must be something to do with this upper pulley wheel. I daren't take it apart. One, because I'll probably get killed by the owner, as well as the fact that I could never afford to replace it if I was to break it, which inevitably would happen on something like this, I reckon. Shifting at the front end, that's done with a conventional Bowden style cable, because remember, the Mavic and Zap system wasn't actually developed for a front derailleur at that point. So here it is there. It's a very simplistic looking bit of kit. I do like the slotted cutouts though on the side, just to save a little bit of weight. Chain set wise, it's a Mavic 631, which is super lovely. I reckon it's probably one of the best chain set styles there is out there. The reason, well, you can't actually see the chainring bolts, can you? Because they come in from the inside, meaning it's a one-piece affair, as opposed to the standard dual-sided chainring bolts that bolt into one another. The downside could be, if you were heavy-handed and you decided to round off a thread, well, you're in for a bit of trouble there, aren't you? But then fitted into the end of the crank arms, we've got a pair of look pedals, but this is the Mavic variety, right? So these are super interesting too, because check out this here. You've got the tension and also the float screws on the underside. And actually part of the pedal moves against the other one. I can't recall this on them. My memory has obviously slipped some information, some useless information over the years, but this is one bit of information I'm glad to have recaptured. The end caps here, by the way, if you've got a pair of these pedals or some of the earlier look pedals, if you're unsure how to remove them, get yourself either a golf stud key or a cricket stud key. That fits in there and that'll undo them and you can get to the bearings. No specialist tools needed. Finishing touches then, well, as you'd expect from a time trial weapon like this, there aren't that many, but a few I'm just going to point out. First up, you've got a bit of coil there, just holding the Zap cable onto the rear brake cable there, where it enters the top tube, or that sort of upper beam of the frame. And then also we've got a custom-made clamp here. The original one, the previous owner sort of hacked or bodged it around slightly so they could get their position, but that wasn't ideal, so a new one was made by Mr. Mike Burrows himself. Lovely bit of engineering that. We've also got a Flight titanium saddle on there too, which loads of you remember really set the standard for lightweight saddles. But I just want to really point out the clearances on this bike. Just check it out. There is nothing there, is there? You can't use 25mm tyres on this. In fact, you probably can't even use a 23mm in that. 19s or nothing. There we are, the Lotus 110. I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic bike. Let me know what you think of it down there in the comment section below, because for me, there is nothing more iconic than this bicycle. Remember as well to check out the GCN shop at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. And well, for me, well, the saddle height looks about right, so I think I'm gonna have a go on it. I can't believe this. Watch out, Boardman, I'm coming for you. How cool is this?